Welcome, everyone, to Howling Coyote Podcast. And I'm speaking to you from the land of the Wabanaki, particularly the Penobscot Nation. And I want to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and future. And I'm happy to have with me tonight Kristen Cardon, who's a PhD candidate at UCLA and has written some interesting papers on suicide justice. And so I'll turn it over to Kristen if she wants to say anything more about herself and the topic of suicide justice. And having read some of her papers, I'll have plenty of questions. So we'll look forward to a really interesting hour. So Kristen, take it away.
Sure. I thank you for having me, Lewis. It's lovely to meet you, lovely to be here. Um, I I'll just say that I came to this topic very, um, you know, sort of serious and painful topic through my own personal experience of loss of loved ones of my own, and through my community as well. I'm a white settler and a queer Mormon, just to give even more context of who I am. And queer Mormon suicide was sort of my original launching point into focusing on this topic and caring about this topic. And then through my research, I've come um, much more broad to the broader field of suicide prevention and ultimately to this idea of suicide justice that I developed in these articles. But it is, I guess I want to say that I come from a place of personal experience and personal grief. And so that's, I don't know, I think that's an important frame for coming at work like this.
Indeed. And um, I work in the Wabanaki communities, which are the First Nations of Maine, and there's too much suicide, and sometimes overdosing, which may or may not be suicide, but in some respects is suicide. When you
Right.
think about um, historical trauma and intergenerational trauma, and the ways that people learn to manage the pain of that trauma, then it becomes a kind of maybe passive suicide, you might say. So it's certainly a problem here. And yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And so tell us about the path that you went through in coming up with the term suicide justice.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm in an English department, and I came to sort of coincidentally happened upon this field, suicidology, and Edwin Schneidman's work. He coined this term suicidology, which is he talks about the scientific study of suicide, and he developed much of the basis of the U.S. field of suicide prevention. Um, and he also happened to be faculty at UCLA, so his papers are stored on campus. And it was through really engaging with his work and realizing that he studied suicide notes. These I think of as a literary genre, um, as an identifiable literary genre. He was studying this genre and coming to all of these conclusions about suicide prevention, and I realized that this was a place where someone with literary training, myself coming from an English department and studying literature, this was a place where I could contribute something to the conversation. I could think about these literary texts differently, and I could bring in that conversation. And I think once I started to bring in scholarship from the humanities training that I have, and from in this article, Indigenous a scholarship and feminist scholarship that have been trained in the humanities, that's when it really became clear to me that the suicide prevention framework um, has so many limitations and really needs to move toward uh, a more justice-oriented framework. So I like that suicide justice is an imperfect term, but I like it as a replacement for this paradigm of suicide prevention.
It certainly catches one's eye. It, it just immediately I thought, oh, I want to read more about that. So, so what can you tell us about? I wasn't aware of Schneidman and the study of suicide notes. What can you tell us about what he and you have learned from that genre of literature?
Yeah, Schneidman, um, he published about this story quite a bit of how he came across a group 30, well, actually it was more than 33 notes, but he studied 33 of them. He came across a body of suicide notes that were stored in uh, the Veterans Hospital in Los Angeles, and he decided that he could do a kind of scientific study by soliciting people who were not suicidal to imagine that they were going to write a suicide note and write the note and then compare these two groups of notes. And so this was basically the foundation. He talks about this as the foundation of the field and this initiation of this scientific study. And this actually, his study continues to be influential. I realized as I was researching, just incidentally, that still to the present, those 66 notes that he originally studied are still being studied. And I mean, there's still publications people are writing include about those notes. So this is sort of continues to be part of the foundation of this suicide prevention scholarship and research. Um, and yet I I just saw a lack of so much context missing. So in particular, the one suicide note that I quoted from his archive in this article, I can read the note. It's very brief. It says, "Just bury me in the land of my ancestors, my own land, the one you people take away from us." And I just couldn't find any kind of engagement with the settler colonial context of Schneidman himself and of this field that he built. And then as we see to date, the pattern of very high rates of indigenous suicides in settler colonies around the world, this just seemed like a big oversight of Schneidman's that I wanted to bring to the foreground in this by critiquing his own work and then offering an alternative. And that's kind of a rambly way to answer that question.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, it I suppose it's rather common in past scholarship to ignore the elephant in the room, which is the historical trauma, the stealing of land and the relocations and all of those terrible things that made people feel hopeless and you know fill them with so much pain that they want to die. And I mean, I think these are important topics, really, to think about how people respond to. Well, I think you use the word imperialism, which is, I think, a good word. um, so I was interested. I I haven't read There by Tommy Orange, but you talk about that, and you talk about a reparative reading method to reimagine social suicide prevention as suicide justice. And I wondered if you could tell us more about that.
Yeah, I'm so happy. I mean, this is one of the reasons I'm so happy to be talking to you because anytime I come back to Orange's novel, it's just such a powerful it's such a powerful read. So I'm always grateful for the chance to revisit his writing. Um, and suicide is not his novel is about many things and many traumas that the characters endure. Suicide is sort of a bit tangential to the story, but there is this moment that I cite um, in the article, um, where he says the problem is that the metaphor he says, I'll just read a little bit from his novel. He says kids are jumping out of the windows of burning buildings, falling to their deaths, and we think the problem is that they're jumping. We're trying to get them to stop jumping, convincing them that burning alive is better than leaving when the shit gets too hot for them to take. So he sort of goes on with that metaphor, but I think uh, this this urgency that Tommy Orange feels about how to conceptualize suicide and then how to prevent. Um, he talks about resource redistribution. He just says, what if instead of the money going to all these grants and all these salaries and these fancy conferences, what if the money goes directly to the communities and the families affected? And just, I think that this is one of the things that's interesting to me here is that Tommy Orange is a novelist and was, trained in the humanities. And here, this is an opportunity in a way for him to make an intervention into a field, uh, the suicide prevention field that he doesn't. This is a way for him to give himself a platform to say maybe this is another way for us to think about it rather than just like trying to prevent people from jumping out of the burning building. What if is there a way that we can put out the fire in the first place? And I just find his intervention into really the field of suicide prevention here. I think that is really powerful, and I guess in a way I want to advocate for that we, our society should take this seriously, even despite the fact that it's coming from a novel. I guess like it shouldn't be any less of a useful intervention or proposal just because it's sort of happening in a fictional space.
Well, and you probably know the quote by Roland Barthes that fiction is truer than fact.
Oh, that's a great quote. I hadn't heard it, but I love it.
Yeah, yeah. There's Patricia Levy, who wrote the Handbook of Arts-Based Research, which is sitting above my desk, talks about fiction as research and has produced some fiction as research. And I think it's really powerful. and probably underused in psychology and medicine, and yet it's such a rich source of data, for all of us. And and it's too bad that we're so siloed. Like I know so little about literary criticism or literary theories, or once I went to we had a panel accepted at a narratology conference, and we wanted to talk. Yeah, and we wanted to talk about the integration of medicine and psychiatry with narratology, and we had some interesting things, I thought, and in this whole conference about 5 people showed up to listen to our panel, and I thought, Hmm. Silos. So and I think that's one of the things I appreciated about what you're trying to do is the interdisciplinary nature of what you're presenting.
I think I hear what you're saying about the silos and the challenge. It's a huge challenge to do interdisciplinary work because I think you run the risk of not being understood or appreciated by people who are sort of in a different perspective, have a different field. But I do think I like what you're saying as well about fiction. You said fiction as research, is that right?
Right, right, right.
Yeah, it reminds me of this um, Alexis Pauline Gumbs talking about Sylvia Wynter, the Jamaican philosopher, and she says scholars in the humanities have are responsible for what is and is not imaginable in their lifetimes, and this idea that it's a responsibility. Or Tommy Orange is a novelist has part of his work is to create what is possible and to create a possible future by imagining it through a novel. And I think I think that's important work because how do we get there unless we can imagine and visualize where we're going, and
Yeah.
what actually is possible within our world.
Yeah, and it it makes so much sense to intervene upstream, than to try and prevent people who are already suffering terribly from ending their lives. I mean, to reduce the causes of suffering would make so much more sense, if we could do that. But it reminds me of our colleague Patrick McFarlane, who says that uh, social workers, and my wife is a social worker, and so is Patrick. But he says social workers are the ambulance drivers of capitalism. And, sadly, there's so much truth to that. You know, um, just the difficulty we have here in Maine of finding housing for people. And how can you how can you stabilize your mental health if you're homeless?
Yeah.
Yeah. And here in our area, so to rent an apartment, you need a credit score of 720, which none of our people have.
Oh wow.
Yeah, um and the landlords don't want them. They want um, you know, relatively wealthy, non-indigenous people.
Yeah.
So we have tremendous difficulty there. And um, just thinking about how to. I mean, I love what um, this author said about Tommy Orange said about taking all the money that goes into suicide prevention and actually, if I'm paraphrasing him correctly, paddling upstream and preventing the pain that leads to suicide. I mean, that would be awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I think that your point about housing, um, I mean, since the land and natural resources as such, that's a huge basis of wealth, the ownership of the land and then I guess renting out access to the land, right? Like that's the basis of so much settler wealth. And and then to then sort of continue to restrict access to the wealth and just even just to the basic like life giving resources of housing, I think is I mean, I think the project of decolonization and like literal I think, land repatriation, returning the land is, um, I just think that it's sort of the same project. It's real. I guess that's how I've come to see it, is that they're related to each other um, because land is the basis of wealth, or one basis of wealth, I guess I should say.
And one of the really painful sights that I've seen, I used to live in Hawaii, and um, so Native Hawaiians living on the beach because they have nowhere to live, and juxtaposed with high rise tourist hotels that um, charge enormous prices for rooms per night. And here we have like Waikiki, we've got people living on the beach and wealthy tourists walking past them. And it's just so painful to watch or to experience because they have no land. Their land was all taken. And they don't even have a reservation to go to. So it's just very sad the way that all plays out.
Yeah, I mean it's true. It's devastating. I think I can get I mean, the enormity of the problem, the weight of the problem, it's so big, and all these problems together. I think what I have found empowering about some of the folks I've met in suicide prevention and sort of the fringes, as well as the Indigenous suicide prevention workers I've met. I think that the way that advocating for suicide prevention, or my term suicide justice, is a way to try to enact some change or get some motion going on these really big problems, these problems of you know de- trying to enact decolonization or um, wealth redistribution. I think that in the project of suicide justice, I guess, is non-controversial in the sense that most people agree we should prevent. Most people agree that ideally, people should not kill themselves. We don't want people to suffer and get to the point of wanting to take their own lives. And so in a way, I see this as kind of it's like a non-controversial way to get at how do we try to solve such big problems in our society, and how do we imagine solutions for them. I don't know, maybe I think I'm getting too big here now.
Well, and I could make it a little radical by saying that we won't solve it as long as capitalism is the dominant driving force of our society. And I think that's what's um, how do we transform capitalism? And I don't have an answer, and I don't expect you to. But the question is, how do we transform capitalism into something that's collaborative, cooperative, altruistic, and non-competitive,
Yeah,
where everyone wins and nobody loses?
yeah. I'm glad you brought it back to capitalism, because it reminds me of um so I can't remember the source of this quote, but something I've heard my professors talk about. uh it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Some commentary on the sci-fi genres we see. But
Right.
actually, I think it sort of comes back to Tommy Orange, maybe in particular, but to cultural workers, right? Maybe fiction, novelists, filmmaking, that this is a space of imagining, maybe imagining what it is. What is a post-capitalistic world, or what is an alternative, or how do we get there? That this is maybe a space of imagining that better world. Because how do we, yeah, like we were saying, how do you get there if you can't imagine it?
Yeah. And if memory serves me, because it's been years since I read her novels, but I think Ursula Le Guin was able to present visions of non-capitalistic societies. Am I remembering that correctly?
I wish I could answer. I haven't. I'm embarrassed to admit that I haven't read her work.
Well, you can't read everything. I
Yeah,
mean, no one
sorry.
can. So um, I'm also fascinated by your story about being a queer Mormon because I imagine there's some degree of courage and trauma associated with that. And um, I don't want to push you, but if you could say some more about growing up Mormon and moving in the directions that you've moved, I think it would be very interesting for people.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk about that. Um, yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very I grew up in Utah, a very Mormon community and family, and I have 2 degrees from Brigham Young University, so which is a Mormon college. I was very, really in to that whole world, and I didn't really know that I was queer until I was 19. Um, and I think that it really, I don't know, I guess that experience has been really formative for certainly my research, as I mentioned at the beginning. I mean, it sort of put me onto this like a deep-seated concern and mission to think about suicide, what has turned into kind of suicide prevention in many kind of broad ways, but very personally to I tell this story that when I was at BYU, I had several friends who confided in me that they were suicidal, and it was really scary and painful. And I spent a lot of time afraid and like working, talking to them and trying to help them, and it was it was a lot for me as an undergraduate. And it was in some cases years later that each of those friends also confided in me that they were queer. And so it was something that I really, um, I guess it's something that I've seen really
Okay,
close
you're
up. Oh,
you're okay. Thank
oh,
you.
that's just some background noise. Um,
Okay.
and-
My dog is interrupting you. I'm sorry.
oh no, that's fine. I just wasn't sure if I was missing some necessary audio.
All right.
No, it's
You're okay.
it's our
Good boys.
acquired by default Chihuahua,
Sit down.
Oh, okay.
which I never thought I would have a Chihuahua,
Good boy.
but
Yeah, good boy.
we rescued him and no one else wanted him, and
Oh,
he's ours. But
that's really sweet.
Okay,
yeah,
good boy.
and he actually
Good boy.
turns out to be a really sweet dog once we got him house trained, and he loves to cuddle and to please, and but he did interrupt an important part of
Yeah.
your story.
Oh,
And
that's no
for that I
problem.
apologize.
That's okay. Uh, I think just the end of that story is just that I mean, all my those particular friends are doing just fine, thriving. We're it. There's been I've seen a lot of survival and resilience, um, but I've also lost some loved ones and friends, and I don't know. I think that for me, coming now that I'm no longer a practicing Mormon, and sort of seeing the world so much differently and realizing so much of this, for me personally, this pain that I was feeling about the conflict of my religion and my personal identity, that there wasn't sort of a quick fix where I could just say, like, actually maybe my religion is wrong about me. And maybe it's actually okay for me to be queer. I think that experience had really, I don't know. I guess I want to bring relief to more people, I guess, is sort of it became really motivating in that way. And it's been, yeah, I don't know. That's, I guess, the heart of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we certainly, I mean, I certainly see that here in Maine, that people who don't toe the conventional mark of sexuality get tremendous um, ostracization and humiliation from their families sometimes. And, for many adolescents, suicide seems like the only option. And, and certainly we're trying to change that. But some of the families are incredibly recalcitrant in their narrow perspectives on the world. And I imagine that's true where you grew up too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And actually, youth homelessness and specifically queer youth homelessness, um, is a problem in Utah because parents are some families are so, um, concerned about keeping the line, whatever boundaries they see, that they'll even kick their children out of their homes. Um, I do think that, um, yeah, I guess kind of the perspective of seeing suicide prevention as like a kind of medical problem, as in, like, this is like a brain chemistry that problem we can fix with individuals, versus, to some, at least to some degree, to see this as a community and a social problem of that we can change. We need to change families and communities and, nations. um, there's that degree of, like, structural change needed, and that is also, I think, that's at least equally as valid when we're thinking about deaths of despair in general, or suicide in particular.
Right. And I think that's the capitalist agenda, is to individualize everything and make it a personal defect as opposed to a social injustice. And one of the things that I've appreciated about indigenous cultures is that idea that people who exhibit symptoms are doing it for all of us. And they're showing us that the society is out of balance and something needs to change socially, and that we should thank them for taking it on rather than giving it to us, which is such a different perspective than the standard DSM, you know, give you a diagnosis and fill you up with sertraline to keep you from killing yourself, especially given that one of the major side effects of sertraline is suicidality, which is ironic.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's a really, I wasn't familiar with that concept before, that idea that you could see symptoms as sort of someone taking this on for the community, you said. Is that right?
Right. It's a common idea among indigenous nations. And and I know particularly on the Dene reservation in Arizona and New Mexico, if someone's sick, everyone is expected to contribute to the cost of their healing because everyone benefited from them taking it on and keeping everyone else from taking it on. So everyone is expected to financially donate to the cost of putting on a healing ceremony. And some of their ceremonies, they can go 11 nights, 12 nights, 14 nights. They can go long.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of feeding of people to be done, things like that. But it makes so much sense to me, that we're all in this together. That and we should thank the people who demonstrate the suffering so that we don't have to.
Yeah, I think that's that idea of sharing the burden and seeing someone who is burdened as sort of helping you, and so deserving help from you, instead of I guess, yeah, just perceiving that person as, oh well, that's that's their individual problem and it doesn't relate to me. I think just that this sense of relationality, I think that's really powerful. That seems like it would, I don't know, I love that as a counterpoint to this kind of individualism.
Yeah. And, when I've said that to people, when I've thanked them for suffering on my behalf, they look at me like I'm crazy at first, and when I explain what I mean, sometimes they get it, but at least they're confused. At least it confuses their sort of habitual way of thinking of themselves as the problem. And there's something wrong with them, that at their core, they're pathology, they're pathologized rather than affected by a pathological society.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's certainly, I love that. Just reconsidering, where is the location of the pathology?
Yeah.
Where is the illness? Where is the wrong? And I think it's a fair question, because I don't think it doesn't always make sense to, like in the Tommy Orange example, to say, well, is the issue the jumping, or is the issue that the building is on fire? Which one do we need to address?
Right. That's such a good metaphor. Yeah, it's so important. So I noticed also that you quoted Christopher Lalonde, who I really admire, and of course Tuck and Yang, who everyone has to quote these days. Um, anything else that anything else about this particular paper that you want to share with us, or we haven't covered?
Well, I think, yeah, the Lalonde, well, I guess that was just a quote about, because suicide is so statistically rare, it makes sense, like we were talking about upstream prevention. The idea of actually trying to identify who would die, would take their own life, is, they say, statistically doomed to failure. So I think that what I came to in this work was what we this needs to be a shared effort and a collaborative work and interdisciplinary work, so that we need to recognize there are a lot of possible interventions here, and take I guess be a little more expansive in what we consider to be an intervention. Like I think Tommy Orange's novel, I don't really see that that's something that's going to be cited in suicide prevention field, but I guess I don't see why not. And I think that this, like, we're talking about a shared community responsibility. I think that suicide is something that we can all contribute to easing the suffering to some degree. So that's I guess that's where I feel strongly for myself, is not that I want to be, I don't really want it to be like about like myself or my ideas or my identity necessarily, as much as like this is something that I can contribute, as well as along with many people. I'm not really being articulate, am I?
No, I think you're getting the point across. And what I'm getting from what you're saying is that, we all have to work together. Like, we have to somehow recognize that whether we're indigenous or, settler colonists, that if we want to transform the world, we have to collaborate, and it's a major project. It's not simple. It's going to take all of us to for some of us to acknowledge our privilege and to move toward decolonization, and for others to recognize that allies are necessary, and that that we have to come together, really, as opposed to fighting each other. If we're going to survive, which maybe gets us into your the second paper we were going to talk about, which is the whole question of species survival, I think, in the Anthropocene. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that piece is there's been this, I'll try to just very briefly say that piece is about there's been this discourse, especially since the Cold War and these fears of nuclear holocausts, and it's been continuous to the present now with the Anthropocene, this idea that we, the human species, could quote unquote commit suicide. I know that commit suicide is not the phrase anymore, but that's been the discourse for many decades. And so the essay just sort of traces that history and analyzes that idea of species suicide, humans creating climate change and ultimately causing species death. I guess, yeah, it is. I think you're right that it's this kind of collective action. I mean, that's what's needed to address climate change as well. And I think in both cases, it's a big challenge, and it's also just necessary. It's hard to know how to, because myself as an individual, I can't fix the problem. We have to forge collectives somehow. We have to, that's the way forward.
Yeah, and you talked about the 46 million acres that burned in Australia, and my wife and I were there for one of those burnings. I'm not sure if it was that one, but it was in a place called East Gippsland, which is the very southeast eastern corner of Australia, and there was this very moving moment where the European-derived people were bemoaning the loss of their homes or the threat to their homes. And one of our Aboriginal friends, Wayne Thorpe, was there, who has a dance troupe, Aboriginal dance troupe, who's all of whom came out to help save people's homes. And he said to them, he said, you know, the irony is that we're trying to help you save your homes from the fire. But if you'd listened to us about how to prevent fires when you took our land so many years ago, you wouldn't be in this predicament. But we're going to help you anyway, no matter what. And I thought that was so moving of him, you know, to articulate it in that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, it's an exceptional kind of, I guess, personal strength to be able to, to see such a deeply flawed, I don't know, to come after so many wrongs and to still be so generous and kind and to help. I think that is, I mean, what an exceptional person.
Indeed, he is. He is. And his whole dance troupe, the way that they pitched in to help the people who stole their land was just amazing. And I mean, inspirational too, of course. And so in this article, you write a little bit about Romeo and Juliet. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Oh man, I gotta pull this up. Can you remind me what I said?
Oh, sure. You said that irony here is defined generally as an outcome that directly opposes expectations. Romeo's belief that Juliet has died, causing his suicide and ultimately Juliet's death as well, is a canonical example of irony because the audience is aware that Juliet is merely in a drug-induced slumber. The sense of possessing and imparting superior knowledge characterizes irony in species suicide discourse.
Yeah, I think that this species suicide is it's difficult. It's a difficult topic because it's something we have to embrace the irony of our own actions. I mean, I continue to drive a gas powered car because that's the car that I have, and embracing that that sense that this is an ironic action. This is something that I do that's essentially counter to my own interest. Is I don't know. It's something I have to come to live with, but also to recognize. I think I think it's an important piece of seeing that part of myself.
Yeah.
This is Szerzynski's this I can't, I'm pulling up his article here, but yeah, it's about this ironic world relation is what he says, is that we basically can't be pure in terms of our contribution to climate emissions. So we need to recognize that we can't take that stance of like, I am blameless because I am part of the problem. And yet we need to simultaneously be able to see that there is a problem and try to address the problem. It's both and.
Right, right. I mean, and I drive a gas car also. Be and I would prefer an electric car, but they're very expensive. So, what can you do? Yeah, and I think I don't know that we'll survive as a species. I think raccoons will take over because they have opposable thumbs.
Cockroaches, right? They're powerful. They'll survive anything.
They survive anything. You're right. Yeah, I don't know if we'll make it. And in the Cherokee creation story, the
Thank you.
creator made the world 3 times, and it was so bad that it had to be, destroyed. And on the fourth try, Buzzard showed up, and Buzzard said to creator, "Look, dude, I ate the last 3 of your creations. Maybe I can give you a few pointers for getting it right this time." But maybe Buzzard didn't quite know everything he needed to. So yeah. So we're getting close to the end, but I didn't want to pass by your MA dissertation on Shakespeare's art and artifice, passing for real and as you like it, because I love Shakespeare. So can you talk a little bit about that dissertation?
Sure. Yeah, my master's thesis, I it was one of the things that I found interesting about uh, the As You Like It films that I was studying at that time. Um, it was there was just a lot of focus on what it means to pass and pass in terms of your gender presentation. And it came in my dissertation or my thesis also to be about sexuality and passing. And I think one of the questions that still interests me from that piece is that question of what forms an identity. Is it sort of what you think about yourself or what you know in your mind? Is it your actions or your behaviors? And I think that's an interesting, uh, it remains interesting to think about sexuality and gender that way, especially to come back to my queer Mormon context. Um, I know many people uh, who will say, well, I identify as gay, but I've never had a gay relationship and I'm in a heterosexual marriage but I am gay. And so I just think that that's something interesting to think about. I guess the relationship between identity and action that way. And that's something that I was exploring in that essay. I realized it's maybe tangential to the Shakespeare, but it came up because of all of the cross-dressing and the thinking about passing in Shakespeare and that kind of that piece of his performance, his plays performances. Yeah, it's something that I guess continues to interest me now.
Well, and you remind me that once upon a time, my wife and I got to watch a performance by the Royal Shakespeare Company from England in New York City of Twelfth Night, in which men played all the parts and they changed costumes on stage. And it was done as it would have been done in Shakespeare's time. And it was fabulous. And what was so interesting was they made the jokes funny. And so many American performers don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
But just before we stop, maybe you could summarize the plot of As You Like It, because probably a lot of people watching this have no clue what the plot is.
Yeah, As You Like It was, oh man, this is a quiz question. Let's see. We have Rosalind and Orlando. Rosalind, she's like a high status person. She meets Orlando, who I believe is wrestling when she meets him. Um, she becomes banished because of I can't remember why she's banished, but the core of the plot of As You Like It is that she's been banished from her fancy home. She goes to like live in the woods and she's afraid for her safety, and so she disguises herself as a man. And she's living in the woods. Orlando is there, who she had been interested in before, and he sees her in disguise and writes writes some love notes to, anyway, it's this little romance that happens while she's disguised as a man, and he's trying to court Rosalind, and then in the end she comes and reveals herself to be in fact Rosalind, who he has loved all along. But I think it is, I mean, I guess it's these questions of how it's an interesting question of passing and As You Like It, because there was a lot of conversation about Elizabeth Bergner, who played Rosalind in the Laurence Olivier film, whether or not she passed. Because when you see a performance on stage, uh, maybe it's easier to pass from a distance. um, that it could be an actress and she's in disguise and it sort of looks convincing. But when you're on film, Elizabeth Bergner, there was a lot of conversation about whether Elizabeth Bergner's face in the close-up film shots would pass for adequately masculine.
Mm.
But I think that it's an interesting, I guess, this question of, in Shakespeare's time, this would have been performed by boys. The boys would have played the women roles, and so it would have been a boy dressed as Rosalind, dressed as a man. And then how you play that as Orlando, who's falling in love with Rosalind, but also this man. But anyway, I think that there's a lot of layers of play with like gender and sexuality there, that maybe we just have I don't know, we clamped down too much and sort of in our policing of those boundaries over time.
Yeah.
I'm sure my wife is actually a Shakespeare. She studied Shakespeare's time in English literature, so I'm sure that she would quibble with how I just characterized that time period. But that's what I'll say from my perspective.
Probably no one listening will quibble at all.
Sure, I hope not.
No. And well, this was really fun. And I just want to encourage you to keep dialoguing outside of English, in the way that you've done with your papers, because I found them very rich, and I think we desperately need interdisciplinary studies. We need what you have to offer in medicine and psychology, and it's just so important to step outside the silos and be collaborative and interactive, and so I just really appreciate what you're doing, and I just want to encourage you to keep doing it, even if it doesn't get you tenure.
Well, we'll see how that goes anyway. But thank you so much, Louis, thank you for reading my work in the first place, and thank you for all your kind words. Thank you for inviting me on this podcast. It was really lovely talking to you, and I really appreciate your perspective.
Yeah, thank you.